Now I'll switch gears into my program. This is a program I call the best camellia for your garden. And what you're seeing is wildfire with a resident male hummingbird, the Allen's hummingbird. We're fortunate in California that several species of hummingbirds stay because, it's not very cold here. And that leads me to my first show is wildfire. Now, it's just a nice big red flower, but what makes it special for me is if you look to the right-hand corner of your screen, that's my kitchen window, which means I see this flower in bloom all the time. I see birds in it all the time, like the hummingbird. So sometimes your favorite camellia, one of your best camellias, is where you really get to see it. It might be outside a window, it might be a special place in your garden, but that's why I have wildfire to start. And it's also because when I first moved to Arcadia, California, that's near Pasadena, part of Los Angeles County, I redid my front lawn into front foundations into red and white, and this was one of my red ones. For those of you know, Betty Foy Sanders is a beautiful white camellia with lots of wonderful red markings. It was named Betty Foy Sanders because her husband was governor when this camellia was introduced, and that's how it got its name. And if you know, Georgia now is trying to have the names of a lot of the first ladies. This is the most famous and I think one of the most beautiful. If you want a classic red anemone camellia, Rudolph fits the bill. It's a Nuccio's nursery introduction. You're going to find that because I'm in Southern California, 20 minutes from Nuccio's, maybe a half hour, there's a lot of Nuccio's introductions. And the Nuccio's named Rudolph for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Cherry's Jubilee is named for the beautiful dessert that's a vanilla ice cream with cherries and little schnapps, usually when served at the table, sort of it's inflamed. And it's a beautiful red camellia with white petaloids. I'm sure you all know that sports are genetic mutations. And what's kind of impressive is you look at Asphasia macarthur in Australia in 1848, it's just a nice peony flower. And probably one of the best mutations is Margaret Davis. It's just a beautiful white flower with that lovely edge. Mr. Davis named it, as I understand, for his wife, Margaret. She was still writing books about gardening and things like that when she was 90 years of age. I'm hoping to follow in her footsteps. Elaine's Betty is a sport that Jim and Elaine Schmelly caught, and they named it for her. So it's called Elaine's Betty. And then another beautiful sport of Betty Sheffield is Betty's Beauty. And maybe we don't like the name Supreme and Special, but they've come into the field, and this certainly is a gorgeous, gorgeous flower mutation from Betty Sheffield. I think it was taken in Randolph Mayford's greenhouse or on his property. Then I was thinking about this, where are all the white flowers? I didn't have any in here. So I picked up Snow Chan and Silver Towers. Both are Nuccio's introductions. And you can see that I think there's something always special about a blemish-free white flower. It's just so pure and gorgeous. And here you see more of the anemone form. And here you see a very nice semi-double with a really, why you can see they call it the petals stick up like towers. Very lovely flower. I don't know if you all grow the Nuccio's introductions as a bunch. This is Nuccio's carousel. You get a little, on the left-hand picture, you get a little view of my garden. I'm taking the plant from the back of the plant out to the bonsai bench and then to the pool, and then a close-up of it. It's grown quite widely here in California, but I notice it's not as widely grown in other places. On the other hand, I think you're probably familiar with Nuccio's Jewel. It's a beautiful, these all happen to be jibs, so they're a little bit bigger and a little bit more vibrant. It's a beautiful peony flower. It does bloom a little late season. So that's one reason why I jib. If something's going to bloom too late or for shows or just for enjoyment, I like to jib it. A classic formal double white with a little pink edge is one of Nuccio's special flowers, Nuccio's pearl. Mine won't bloom for a while yet, except the jibbed ones, but you can see it's really a very, very pretty formal double flower, medium sized. Nuccio's cameo is sort of mid-sized to a little larger. What I like about it is its beautiful form and color, but it also has a very long season. It will bloom early, mid, and late. So I have Nuccio's cameo blooming now, and I'll have them in March. And then the classic white formal double Nuccio's gem. One of this sort of does better in California, and then there's other formal double whites that do well in other parts of the country. Very lovely Nuccio's introduction. A little bit newer is Nuccio's Bella Rosa on the left, and its variegated form on the right. I guess most of us Americans like variegated flowers. The Europeans seem to not, but I think that's a gorgeous kind of variegation. The other thing that's nice about Nuccio's Bella Rosa is I've seen 1 gallon plants in Nuccio's, Nuccio's, by the way, is in Altadena, California, which is fairly high altitude in the foothills of San Gabriel Mountains. They will get a 5-inch formal double in a 1 gallon plant. Now that's a nurseryman's dream to have flowers like that in a 1 gallon plant. And it's also a long blooming season. I wanted to show you Julius Nuccio because I think it's a gorgeous flower. And this is Julius Nuccio, and I think it's about 1965 to 69 when he was a young man. He's obviously passed away. Julius and his brother Joe founded Nuccio's nursery in 1935 in their parents' backyard. And Tom Nuccio was telling me this a couple of weeks ago. He says, well, his mother had to move the clothesline 3 times. Of course, no one has clotheslines anymore. We just use dryers. But and his dad had to move the garden. And then they moved to Altadena around 1946 at the end of World War II. This is another one of their introductions. And that shows a beautiful moire pattern of variegation, which I think is quite stunning. The red flower with white variegation is usually quite striking, and then the golden stamens. These aren't the greatest pictures of Grand Marshal, but it's a nice peony form, or usually more anemone form, and variegation. I've seen some that are just absolutely startling. These are decent, but always looking for new pictures. But it's a nice mid-sized camellia. As I said earlier, when I ripped out everything that was in the front of my house 32 years ago, I started with Wildfire, then I did Adolphus variegated, and then I added Glen 40 and Glen 40 variegated. So I alternated the red and the red and white. And, you know, they got their name, you may know this, Glen 40, because Glen Azalea Nursery found Glen in bed 40, so they named it Glen 40. The variegated form is just striking. Also this year, I'm kind of a doubting Thomas. I keep seeing rose form double to formal double. And so this year I watched for 2 weeks a Glen 40 variegated until it fell off. It never showed stamens. So yes, some of these do open up and show stamens, and some will stay as formal doubles. To me, I'm a fan of the Higos. They're just different single flowers. My favorite, and therefore I make it the best Higo, is Okan. The Nuccios introduce this very large Higo, classic shape, 3 big petals, stamens. It's not an official Higo. That's why I call it American Higo, but it's really a very nice camellia. I don't know if you all grow Tiffany. It's been around a long time. I think the color pink in the peony form, sometimes it's anemone form, is just a classic, beautiful, large camellia. Royal Velvet is very, very popular. I used some pollen today from Royal Velvet to pollinate a few flowers because I love the red color. And I have a picture of Joe Nuccio next to Royal Velvet. You may have heard this story, but this is how I heard Royal Velvet got named. Jim was sitting on the throne taking care of business, looked down, saw a bath mat, turned it over, and the word said Royal Velvet. He came up and told his uncle and his father and his brother that was going to be the name for this new introduction, Royal Velvet. And here it is variegated. It's just, again, the striking contrast makes for a lovely variegated bloom. Tata is a very large white formal semi-double flower. And I always thought it was like, Tata, how are you, Tata? No, the Nuccio boys, when they were children, couldn't say their aunt's name. And like kids, you know, they just come up with a name. So they called it Tatia, and that's the name of this flower. Kramer Supreme is probably Kramer Brothers Nursery's most famous introduction. They lost their land in the mid-80s, 1980s, with the need for housing in California. This one has been growing in my yard, was planted before I even got to this house. Interestingly, it shows, my plant is not that great. It shows more pink red than big red, but it's still one of the nice older peony-formed landscape plants. Going back to mutations, you're probably familiar that the elegans family sort of began in England in 1831 with elegans chandelier or elegans chandler, and it has mutated many times. One of the ones that people like is elegans variegated. My neighbors' houses are all built about the same time in the mid-50s. I have two neighbors. Both of them have an elegans variegated that's planted in the north corner of their house. They have never pruned it, they have never fertilized it, and they water it. It blooms every year. Though, sort of pointing out that camellias can be pretty rugged. Well, when it mutated into C.M. Wilson, which is a nice older flower, it's also pretty in its own right. Well, when it mutated, it got elegans splendor, which is arguably one of the best large anemone flowers that we see. In fact, if you have a large anemone flower, the odds are very high that it's one of the elegans. It too mutated, and the Nuccios caught this beautiful white elegant champagne. I just bought a new plant of elegant champagne, and it's much wavier than this, and the petaloids are wavy. So there's sort of at least two minor variations in the way the petal form. But whatever, it is a gorgeous flower, and it does sort of remind me of champagne when the petaloids are sticking up like that. Gorgeous, gorgeous flower. These were, Grand Prix was one of the other flowers I put in my front yard. You can see the window behind it. It's blooming today. I had three nice large ones. I wish there was a show. I had a winning tray of 3 large Grand Prix. Instead, we'll have the picture. Grand Slam is also a Nuccio's introduction. Grand Prix is very large. Grand Slam is usually large. Has several forms. Both nice red camellias. I don't know if you know Tomorrow Park Hill or not, but Ralph Peer was one of the starters of the Southern California Camellia Society and an early president of the American Camellia Society. He had an estate in a certain section of the Hollywood Hills in Los Angeles, and he had a lot of camellias, and it sported, and this is what it looked like, and he named it after his estate, Tomorrow Park Hill, which has been sold. Peer was quite famous in the music industry, and the family is still around and about. I like Carter Sunburst when it stays in this beautiful bud form, pink flower with markings. although we'll open up. It's just a very nice pink variegated camellia. It too has mutated a few times. I don't think anyone grows just Miss Charleston. It's just a red flower. But when it's variegated like the one on the left, it wins. This is a picture one. Marilee Gray was one of my mentors. She passed away, but she must have won for 30 years from this one plant over and over and again, because it was big, it was large, beautiful variegation, and stayed in a bud form. And you can see it's really blotches. It's not really moirade. Now, I got a cutting from her, and this is what I get to the right. It's an okay flower, but boy, the one on the left is so much superior to the, but again, and of course, it came out of South Carolina. It's out of Charleston. It's a beautiful, beautiful camellia. A very large japonica. Katie was named after Catherine Nuccio, and she was, as I understand it, a plus-size woman, liked big flowers, and so they found this big flower and named it for her, Katie. And the Katie variegated is to the left. It almost changes color when you grow it in different places and have different variegations. This is my Katie. She got groomed today. Doesn't she look cute? And there's my little flower I introduced called Little Katie. I don't know about you, but our pets seem to be maximum members of the family. Lady Laura, as I understand it, was a woman from Alabama who gave seeds to Doc Lundy. And so he grew them out, and he grew this beautiful seedling, which I think, again, is a gorgeous pink flower with stripes. So he named it for her, Lady Laura. My Junior Prom is just beginning to bloom, and it's a rose form. And to me, it always looks better in the bud form like this. If you're a photographer, these white, really blush flowers, creamy flowers, it's awfully hard to capture the color. You can only see a little creaminess. It almost looks more white, but it's supposed to be a little creamy. And of course, is a very lovely creamy Nuccio introduction. This is Happy Harlequin. It sort of want to show as a tray of threes on the left, and there it is on my bush. A beautiful pink flower, some red markings here and there, and a nice white border. Red Hots is very, very popular in California as a small red flower. In fact, there are people like Don Bergamini who always want us to change it to a medium, but it's really a small to medium flower. It has two nice features. It grows more upright, and so it fits nicely in a small space, and it has gorgeous green leaves. So if I'm looking for leaves for a show, to sort of make sure I have quality foliage for a camellia show, that's one of the places I look. I don't know if you grow Queepy Doll. It's a nice, it's really one of those chalky pinky white flowers that are only beautiful because they have petaloids. It's named Rose O'Neill, drew Queepy Doll, made it famous. If you're my age, you know about Queepy Dolls, but you ask the younger people and they never heard of them. But it's a beautiful little flower, and it's the petaloids that make this flower. Another classic flower that does well because it has petaloids is Hishikirito. Now, its history is totally different. It came from Japan to the United States, and it's been here a long time. But that fountain of petaloids in the center, and it's a semi-double, but look at it's got, we say semi-double is 2 or more rows. This has at least 3 or 4 rows of petals. The other nice thing about Hishikirito is you can have a plant and there'll be a whole bunch that look like this. So it's a nice cookie cutter flower. This is a relatively new variegated flower, or at least new to me, Tudor Baby. It's a Hewlin Smith introduction. Randolph Mayfors and others are using Tudor Baby variegated to variegate other flowers because they like it so well. For those who don't know, Tudor Baby has an interesting history. Hewlin Smith loved big red flowers. So when he found this small red flower in the back of his greenhouse or wherever it was growing, he threw it in the creek. But somebody pulled it out, thank goodness. And then when you variegate it, it is just one of the one of the best little variegated flowers, real good. And of course, he named it after one of his daughter's children. The joke is he didn't remember the kid's name. He always called him Baby Tudor. I think this was just Hewlin's way of, he had quite a sense of humor. You know, there's a lot of nice new flowers, but there's some oldies that we should never neglect talking about or honoring in their own right. And Pink Perfection is one of them. It truly is a small, beautiful pink flower. And certainly there are people, probably in your area, certainly in my area in Pasadena, that there are Pink Perfections that have been 20, 30 feet tall. Unfortunately, some of the new owners cut them all down and rip them out. But, you know, a big Pink Perfection will bloom reliable year after year. And it's just a nice, sweet bloom. Another classic is Hermie. Again, it's hard to beat a pink flower with red markings and a white border. Very, very popular, wonderful plant, not to be overlooked as an old-time flower. Switching gears, in fact, one of our colleagues called me today. He wants to write a story about Tamano Ora because it's such a beautiful little flower with that genetic white border. You probably know the story, so I won't talk too much about it, but it was found by a charcoal collector in the small rural area of Tamano Ora, which I believe means jewel or bejeweled. And it's the only plant they ever found, but fortunately the Japanese propagated it, and Nuccio's brought it to the United States, and it's widely propagated and grows very nicely. Here are some of its children, some of its seedlings, I guess you should say. My favorite is Tamar Peacock. I love that white border and the maroony wash because it's sort of not an even, it's got that sort of irregular blending into the white. Tamar Electra is on the left. It's a frustrating plant for some people because it sometimes just turns red and doesn't do anything. The one I see, I gave mine up because it kept, some years it was red, some was red and white, but the one in the Huntington Botanical Garden grows upright and year after year has these beautiful flowers just like that on the left. The one on the right is Tamar Americana. That's the Tamar with the most white. I have it and I use it as a seed plant because it has, it's just a nice camellia, lots of white. This is my granddaughter's favorite camellia, man size. It also is a sport. It's sported from Magnolia flora, and it was Hodie Wilson, a very famous Louisiana, well, I guess he ran a nursery area, a garden area, very famous camellia man. And it's just a beautiful little flower. Not only is it a beautiful flower, but it's quite, it may not be profuse, but it puts out a lot of blooms. It's a nice camellia. By the way, I keep asking people always say, how to get its name? How to get its name? I couldn't figure it out. So one of my friends who is a woman said, well, of course, it's just like the size of a man's boutonniere, man size. Maroon and Gold is one of my favorite camellias because Julius Nuccio, Jude, who passed away about a year ago, wanted to name this for Maroon and Gold for the colors of USA. But you know, whether it be college, pros, basketball, football, they do not want you to use any of their names, logos, because there's big money in shirts and hats and all sorts. So he had to change the name to Maroon and Gold. But Jude, we call him Jude, named this Maroon and Gold. Another great hybridizer was Dr. Holmeyer, and it's awfully hard to find a better yellow japonica than Dahlonega. It also has a nice plant because the bark is gray. Dahlonega, by the way, I believe in Cherokee is gold, and it's there's a little town called Dahlonega where the first U.S. mint was, and there's also a gold mine. Gold mine there too. It was the first gold rush in the U.S. was in Dahlonega. I just had to put a few new ones in. This is Kaleidoscope. It's a Nuccio's introduction. And again, it's a nice white flower with lots of stripes on it. I've seen them all red. I've seen them half red, but when it does this, it does look like a kaleidoscope. You know how you remember the kaleidoscope, you change the lenses around and it changes colors and shapes and so forth. So does Kaleidoscope. Nice new introduction. Another relatively new introduction from Nuccio's is Ferris wheel. Again, it mutates, does lots of different things, but when it's white with markings, and it's a large semi-double, sometimes anemone flower, Ferris wheel. It mutated, and this was introduced Circus. It's a strawberry. It used to be called, well, we used to call it strawberry wheel Ferris wheel, but its new name is Circus. It was introduced this year. Switching gears to the non-retic hybrids, and we see the Celianensis times japonica as the classic Williams size. One of the classics on the left is just sort of, that's what a Celianensis looks like. It's not a very spectacular flower, but look how floriferous it is. And it was used in a lot of propagation by Clark and J.C. Williams. My understanding is J.C. Williams gave seed to Clark, and Clark introduced donation, so he gave the name donation because he got the seeds from J.C. Williams, who the Williams hybrid's a name for. This is Joe Nuccio coming out of the Nuccio shed. Obviously, both Julius and Joe are the co-founders and are no longer living with us these days. And that's a nice little incurved flower, Julius Nuccio. Joe Nuccio. This is one of my favorite non-retic hybrids, and it's one of those that has two forms. On the left, it's sort of an open peony form, and then it doesn't look at all like the same flower, and it's formal double. I've seen both on the same plant. Generally in Southern California, we get this one. Sacramento and others, you get that. This year I jibbed Spring Days and I got a nice formal double. But usually I get them like that. And then I've seen them sort of in between at Camellia shows. It's sort of neither of those. Nikki Crisp was named for her grandson. Her daughter's name is Dr. Crisp. She's a hybridizer. She's one of the few, I think it's New Zealand hybridizers, and Dr. Crisp didn't introduce her, her mother did. But isn't that a beautiful light pink, always has notch petals, named for a grandson. When I first saw it, I thought, well, of course it's crisp. It's a nice crisp flower, but no, it was named for her grandson. A nice small red non-retic hybrid is Freedom Bell, very profuse bloomer. Taylor's Perfection seems to be grown very, very widely, and it is a good example of when we get these Celianus hybrids, we get the lavender pinks begin to show up in the flowers, and Mr. Taylor called it Taylor's Perfection. This is Tom Nuccio holding Night Rider upside down so you can see the pink roots. Tom has some of the biggest, strongest hands you've ever seen in your life. He was a rower in college, and he has worked his whole life in the nursery. And of course, you're familiar with Night Rider, one of the most beautiful little dark black-red out of Koro Tsubaki. Red stems, red foliage when it begins. Coral Delight and Coral Delight variegated. Coral Delight here on the right-hand side was taken in Nuccio's, in Descanso Gardens, and there's the variegated form. It's a good one to put under a window because it's semi-dwarf, it grows slowly. People always ask me, what is your favorite camellia? And I really don't have an answer, it changes all the time. But I can tell you this, my favorite non-retic hybrid is Island Sunset. I just love this flower with the coral tones of coral pink and the shape. Here it was taken with my finger in it and the raindrops, but it's a gorgeous flower. I just love this bloom. Also very, very popular, buttons and bows, and Nuccio's introduction. Small, formal, profuse bloomer, just a beautiful formal double flower. Lucky Star's been around a long time. And Lucky Star variegators just showed up. And this is on my plant. It got variegated by Don Lesmeister. Don Lesmeister is up in the Sacramento area of California, and he does it by what he calls tying in variegated plants. Basically, if you follow me, it's an approach graft, but he does it like 4 or 5 times on the same plant, and he got, I think, one of the most beautiful variegations. It's only been out variegated like this a couple years. So, and I think Don's going to do a Zoom for us, Richard, and that's just a beautiful kind of variegation. Probably you know this, but the best fragrant camellia for most of us is high fragrance. It's a beautiful flower, beautiful scent on a nice plant, very robust plant, very light green leaves, by the way. The only it has 2 downsides. It doesn't bloom when it's little. You need a big plant. And then it's hard to find a perfect circular flower, but still, it's the best fragrant camellia, and it's really a very, very pretty flower. It's very sweet fragrance. Just a little bit about hybridizing for yellow camellias. You know, it's been a long, frustrating process. And that's Camellia nitidissima. One of our people here has been growing it, and it took him 11 years before it began to bloom regularly. So you've got to be very patient, but it is nice. And Mr. Yoshikawa used C. nitidissima, the yellow camellia, with Betty Foy Sandusky cocaine nishiki. You can really see the breed, right? You can see that it has the stripes like Betty Foy and the yellow from nitidissima. Kogen nishiki means golden brocade. Nishiki always means brocade in Japanese, and you see a lot of Japanese flowers using the word nishiki. Mr. Yamaguchi bred Sanritsu Ko. Tom Nuccio and I like this best of the new yellow ones. It's yellow, it's a rose form, it's yellow with a peachy or pink edge, and then when it opens, it looks like a spent rose. Well, what's the best reticulata? You probably already know this. It's Frank Hauser. Frank Hauser is just wins everywhere in Australia, New Zealand, the South, the West. It can be a peony flower, but usually it's sort of a complicated semi-double, nice, perky flower. If you don't know how it got its name, this is what I heard, that Dr. Hohlmeier, who is an anesthesiologist, by the way, and his colleague, Frank Hauser, lived next to him. He was a general family practitioner. They were friends. Frank was looking over the fence when Dr. Hohlmeier was looking at his seedlings and admired this flower, so he got to be named Frank Hauser. It's probably won more camellia sills than any other flower in the last dozen years. I also like its variegated form, and so do other people. It competes with Frank for top honors in many shows. Again, a gorgeous flower. One of the competitors for best reticulata is Barbara Goff. Gordon Goff raised this. He was in Northern California, and he named it for his wife. These are both my winning entries at different shows as a jib flower. It's really just a beautiful flower, beautiful female flower. Love her. You probably know how Alaska Beauty got named. Dr. Parks, when he began his career, was at the Los Angeles State and County Arboretum. He was moving to North Carolina to teach and continue his career. So he gave a whole bunch of flowers to David Feathers in Northern California with the permission to raise them and to introduce them. And so that society, the Northern California, I think it was David Feathers at that point, named it for Los Angeles State County Arboretum. Again, a classic camellia. One of my other favorites, because it's a peony form, is Ruta Hagman. Ruta means friend in Swiss German, and Hagman sort of means hedge. Some people don't like the name, but I don't think it translates well. Friend and a bush, friendly bush, and it's a gorgeous coral flower. Probably the best formal reticulata is Valentine Day. It may grow slow, but it's a beautiful flower. It was bred by Howard Asper. And there's its variegated. That was definitely taken in, I think that was in Howard Rhodes' garden. And you can see the Valentine Day variegated is also a striking bloom. Beautiful, beautiful flower. Here's Dr. Clifford Parks, which is an award winner. The photo shows Pat Short, who is an American who lives in England, but's been very active in Camellias, is an ex-president of the International Camellia Society, and she's giving an award to Dr. Parks. Dr. Parks, for those who don't know, passed away this spring. I think it was March, and he will be honored in the 2000 Camellia yearbook with dedication that Pat wrote, and I've also done a Camellia tribute to him. He's been so much a prolific writer and hybridizer of camellias. He will be sorely missed. Valley Knudsen has a beautiful color. It's also a Howard Asper introduction. I also like Miss Tuileries. It's a rose form, and it's kept its rose form. I like it when it stays like this and doesn't open up. Named after Miss Tuileries in Northern California, a beauty contest. But it's a good beauty contest because you have to have certain talents and not just physical attributes. John Hunt from Australia named this beautiful big reticulata for himself. The Nuccias tell this story. There was a woman looking for camellias in their back 40. It's a large nursery, and there's lots of places to walk. And she was back there, and they heard this screeching from this woman who thought she had been killed or tripped or hurt herself. What she had done is she had found a huge John Hunt and was so overwhelmed with joy she was screaming. She bought the camellia, took the camellia off the plant, put it on her head, and went to a social on a Sunday afternoon for a hat with John Hunt on her head. Another beautiful camellia is Harold L. Page. Again, it's one of those big red camellias. The only downside for me is it blooms late in the season, so I have to jib it. This is my backyard, and it's small. California yards are small compared to some of the people who have 10, 12 acres. We have partials of acres. You know, an eighth is probably a good sized lot. Don't want to spend too much time on sasanquas, but it's awfully hard to beat Yuletide. And we at least have to mention that some of these make wonderful landscape plants. Yuletide is exceedingly popular. I was at Armstrong's today. That's a local nursery chain, and they were selling Yuletide. You see it everywhere. It's a simple red flower with golden stamens. The other landscape sasanqua I like is Hugh Evans because it blooms early and is a very profuse bloomer. Simple flower with kind of wrinkled, twisted petals. Jean May is another old favorite, sort of a rose form, beautiful pink flower, but it's the stunning array of flowers that make it a wonderful camellia in the landscape. It's not really a show flower, but not all camellias need to be show flowers. Probably you all know a Gao. It's just one of the nicest flowers. I like it because it's sort of later than most of the Sanquas and blooms just at the beginning, January. Mine is still blooming, probably will be bloomed out by the end of the month. But it's just a beautiful flower. The name translates to smiling faces. Shibori Igao is the variegated form. Shibori means variegated in Japanese, and it can be very white or others with more or less white. It's been used by lots of people to variegate. In other words, if you want to variegate a flower, use rootstock like Shibori Igao. Adolf Alderson is also a good one to variegate. It's really, really hard to beat Shishigashira as a landscape plant. The previous owner planted Shishigashira in our yard here. It's bloomed every year for the 34 years I've been here. And it's neat, clean, only needs to be pruned to keep it off the path and get rid of some dead branches. It's just a beautiful, beautiful landscape camellia. Star above star should have a form of one set of petaloids instead of another that forms star on star. Doesn't always do that, but it's a beautiful camellia. You can see it's blooming nicely on this bush. And it has that lavender pink tone. Probably one of the best Sasanquas is Conjero. Jude Nuccio said it was his favorite of the Sanquas. It's not technically a Sasanqua, but it's a sun camellia. Beautiful as a flower, a hedge in the Huntington, a specimen in the Huntington, and as a bonsai. And then I use it for rootstock. It's just a nice, and it's also, I put it in front of other things that need a little shade because it's a sun-tolerant camellia. And now I want to say goodbye. This is my resident hummingbird in Adolf Alderson, and that's Prima Ballerina. So I will take questions. I shall try to take this down, huh?
I'd kind of leave it up, Brad, in case somebody wanted to try and refer.
Okay, sure, fine.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Really interesting. Everybody,
I went 45
see your faces and ask questions.
What can we ask him?
I'll start off the questions.
Mary, go ahead.
Can y'all hear Mary?
Yes.
Okay. I noticed, Bradley, that was terrific. It gave me a lot of ideas and inspiration for that. And I want you to explain to me about the Hermes. I thought Hermes, they're so lovely, but that they had a variegated or different arrangement of colors on one plant. Is that true of all Hermes?
I don't know if it's all, but yes, I see frequently large plants with Hermes as shown in the photo, and then a pink one that they call pink Hermes, which is not as attractive. Now, if it was my plant, I would probably cut off those branches. The one I'm familiar with is probably about 5 feet by 5 feet, and you could cut out the sport, which is pink. It also has sported others. I don't see others in the plants around me. Yes, so it does sport, mutate. And if you don't want it,
all right, thank you.
I don't know why you can't cut it off. I mean, you don't want to ruin the plant, but you can. Like, for example, today I noticed on the kaleidoscope I showed you, there was one branch with a red flower. Now, you could cut it off and propagate it, but who needs another red flower? You know, it's not worth it. I want to mark it and then either cut it off or because I don't want the plant to have red flowers. I want to have it the kaleidoscope.
Good, I appreciate that.
So I'll ask you all a question. Do you have a favorite camellia, or are you like me? It's the best one in the yard at the moment.
The next one we buy.
I have a question for you, Brad. We moved into our house last April, and we have a sizable area off to the north, which is a good side. And the thing that I struggle with, and so we really have a blank palette. The thing that we struggle with is how do you turn that into a garden with some sense about it instead of just planting camellias all over the place? How do you design a camellia garden?
Well, you can hire someone. I like to do things myself, even though I make mistakes, like everyone else. But I think you're right. You want to plan it. You know, again, I'm assuming it's all shade north. It all take camellias or whatever.
Yeah, pretty much.
I would do, you know, I would plan it out on graph paper or something. You know, I like, again, depends on your interest. One style that's very popular is, you know, small, medium, and large. And you may want the large ones trees that aren't camellias, I don't know. Or you want to have, you know, small plants like Coral Delight, Nuccio's, what's it called? Bella Rosa crinkled in the front, and then medium ones, and then taller ones. Also, I wouldn't make a straight line. I wouldn't do it as a rectangle. I might do a curve. Now, I have a neighbor. My wife likes curves. I like curves. We do curves. We could never teach this woman to do anything but plant annuals. Boop, 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 boop. You know, but a little flow. And I would also, so I would plan, I like some texture too. There's some foliage camellias that you might like just because they have nice nice foliage and indiscriminate, like the corkscrews. But I would plan. I think what you're saying is you want to plan.
Yeah.
And you know, every time I plan, sometimes I put something in too much sun or too little sun. But if one area has more sun, you want to think about debutante, ace of hearts. Someone's more shade. You might want the yellows in the more shady area. And maybe you're not obsessive, but I am. I would probably sit in that yard. I might put a chair out there at 8 o'clock in the morning, noontime, and 4 o'clock to see how, you know, you don't have to literally do that, but I mean, sort of, you know, where is the sun and shade, and then plant what you and your wife like, or at least for me, it's, well, actually, I get the backyard, my wife gets the front yard, but you know, you have to work things out with your partner if you're going to stay married. I'm at 55 years, and I'm committed to 60. That's a joke. I mean, I'm at least 60.
That sounds like your joke. That's
I don't want to pass before I've been married 60 years. But that's a joke.
Okay. Well, thank you for the ideas of.
But I would graft it out a little.
Yeah.
You know, and I've lost trees, and I had to put shade cloth up. Shade cloth works, but it's not as pretty as trees or a nice natural look. If you can. Again, you know, we have had one rainstorm in the last 6 months. We're now getting heavy wind, and they promise rain. You know how much rain we get a year? 14, 15 inches a year. Well, you know, there are parts, I don't know about your area, but there are parts that get that in a weekend. And they flood them.
Yeah,
So, you know, you have a different microclimate is all I'm saying. Camellias will grow, but you got to know your area.
We get 55 to 75 inches of rain. Last year was very, very wet. Typical is 55 to 60.
Yeah, it's totally different.
Yeah.
And we're very, very hot. And do you want to do species? Some people don't want the species, but there's some interesting species. If you want a little section of species or just one or two as a focal point, like Camellia azalea, Camellia amplexicalis. I don't know, whatever you like, really.
Yeah. Well, the thing that we started to try is to build some basic structure so that there are several focal points. And
Yes,
right now I've got, what do we got? 25 or 30 that are just in the ground
yes,
and easily moved. So over the next 3 to 6 months, we want to kind of complete the basic structure and then add as we go.
sure.
Okay, thank you.
Brad, this is Richard Bugelin. Could you explain to the people what a lath house is and how you use them in California? But you never see them around here at all.
Well, you may not need them. You got to remember, this summer we had temperatures 113. That is horrible for plants. They just burn, even if they're in the shade. So, but we need shade. A pergola or a lath house. I have pergolas. They're a little more solid than a lath house. Now, first of all, what you do is you save some money and you invite your wife to go to Portugal or Spain in the ICS. She says no. So now you have the money to build these structures. That's what happened. And I got a carpenter, and I called the long, narrow one Portugal and the more square one Spain. And I put them where there's too much sun, at least in California. You know, there are places where tea plants grow in full sun in South Carolina. They would burn to a crisp here. But these are good sized structures. Not good size, they're sturdy structures. And they're, I don't know, can you know, like this? And you, I'm not a carpenter. I had someone build them. I do a lot of gardening myself, but I'm not building pergolas or lath houses. I don't know if that totally answered your question. I like lath houses better than cloth, shade cloth. Shade cloth works fine, but it's not attractive, not particularly. I have one because I had trees blow down and I had to put them up or I'd lose all my camellias. Then I had to talk to the local gendarmes that it was not illegal because they were worried about people parking vans and things on the street, you know, under lath houses. Off the track, but.
Also, do you agree with Randolph Mapus that reticulatas do best in full sun?
Not in California. They will take sun, yes, I agree with that. But see, this is the microclimates. And remember, we're talking 12 inches of rain and high heat and low humidity. Californians complain about cold when it's 45 degrees. They complain about humidity when it goes up. Well, you know what it's like in Washington, D.C. That's humidity in the summer. So I wouldn't grow reticulatas in full sun here. Now, Ralph Peer did have his in Park Hill, had them in a lot of sun and they did fine. So I agree, but again, the microclimate, where you are is important. They don't need to be in heavy shade, that's for sure.
Now, wasn't Ralph Peer Johnny Cash's manager?
I don't know if he was. He definitely was in the music business and he did a lot of, albums and that kind of thing, and sheet music and all that. A lot of Latin music came. He was big in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. Then his son took over the business and they moved it more north. Yeah, he might have been. He was very, very active in the music industry. That's true. I don't know if he was a manager or not. Not sure.
And you go over how he brought reticulatas into this country?
I can briefly say, that Descanso, they got in touch with, I think his name was Dr. Sai. Is that right? I think Dr. Sai had them in Hunan. And it's not quite coming to me, but Ralph Peer was a very wealthy man and he traveled a lot. And he met, I think it was one of the MacArthurs, an Australian anyway, and they were talking about the retics on this trip. and he ordered them. So he also went to the same source as Descanso. In about, yeah, I guess they were shipped about 1948. And as you know, they had to be quarantined, and some of them made it and some didn't. The beauty is that they were able to bring them over to Southern California, and then Ralph Peer was probably better at distributing them. He had them propagated and gave them away to he was a big proponent of helping the Huntington, and I'll bet I don't know how you all got, I don't know how the reticulas got to your area, for example, whether someone like Pierre sent a whole bunch to a compatriot or whether it was separate shippings. But I know Camellia people were really sharing plant material with each other. And of course, then they just carried them across in their bags. Now, you can get in serious trouble if you start on an airplane with plant material. But people used to do that all the time, and it wasn't considered a problem in the 40s and 50s, at least.
So Brad, it's Diane. How did you get interested in camellias?
Well, I grew up in Massachusetts, where it snows, and we have bluebirds, yes, but we do not have camellias. And February is one dismal, cold place. I moved to California to work at University of Southern California, and I saw these beautiful flowering plants called camellias. I asked my neighbors what they were. They say camellias. They, well, what are their names? Red, pink, white. I said, come on. I'm much too obsessive for that. But they knew about Nuccios. I went up to Nuccios, and Jude Nuccio identified them. I think I took about 8 or 10 of them, and they identified them. And he was really generous about that, but he couldn't identify one of them. He called over this nice older gentleman who was Julius. I didn't know that at the time, who also was able to identify it. And that sort of piqued my interest. So, and the Nuccios, if you ever come to Southern California, in the camellia person, there's 3 things you need to do. You got to go to Nuccios, you got to go to the Huntington and Descanso. That's what I call the triple crown of Southern California camellias, because they're so friendly. And frankly, I don't see too many spring chickens out there. They're not going to be with us forever. I call them the boys. They're 75 and 72, I think, are running it. And there's nobody in the family. And that's sort of the way family businesses are, They had a lot of support from their parents, and then their fathers and uncles, blah, blah. But it sort of runs out, The family farms aren't the same as they used to be. So that's how I got interested, because I always liked gardening and plants, but seeing flowers in February was like a treat. It's still a treat. I'm out every morning, aren't you? Unless it rains, and I don't have to worry about rain very often.
Thank you.
The other thing I took up is photography, and I don't use a cell phone. I use a real camera, and that adds another beauty too. And you think you have a gorgeous flower, and you take a picture of it, and it didn't shape up to the one you took last week.
Any other questions?
Matthew, you still there?
He's there.
I'm here.
You got the message. You're going to send that